The morning sunlight streamed through the classroom windows, casting long rectangles of light across the desks. Miss Rivera moved between the rows, watching her students bend over their math worksheets. 25 busy heads except for one. In the third row, a small boy's chin kept dipping toward his chest, his pencil slipping from his fingers. "Alex," she said softly, touching his shoulder. The 10-year-old startled awake, blinking rapidly. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, quickly picking up his pencil. His eyes were shadowed underneath, his uniform shirt the same one he'd worn yesterday and the day before. Ms. Rivera nodded and moved on, but her gaze returned to him throughout the morning. Something had changed in the past few weeks. The bright, eager student who used to race through assignments now struggled to stay awake. His homework came in less frequently, and when it did, the handwriting was messy, rushed. When the lunch bell rang, the children leapt from their seats, chattering as they lined up at the door. Ms. Rivera watched as Alex shuffled to join them, his shoulders curved inward. He didn't join the excited conversations about weekend plans or the upcoming soccer tournament. The teacher's lounge was noisy with conversation when Ms. Rivera entered, but she only stayed long enough to microwave her container of leftover pasta. Something pulled her back to the classroom, a feeling she'd learned to trust during her 15 years of teaching. She paused in the doorway, surprised to find Alex sitting alone at his desk. Most children raced to the cafeteria or the playground during lunch. He hunched over a blue lunchbox, methodically lifting an empty fork to his mouth, chewing nothing. Ms. Rivera stepped back, not wanting to embarrass him. She waited a moment before entering, pretending she hadn't seen. "Oh, I didn't expect anyone to be in here," she said, keeping her voice light. "Do you mind some company?" Alex shook his head, quickly closing his lunchbox. "I'm done anyway," he said, starting to stand. "All ready? But lunch just started." She settled at a desk near him, opening her container. The smell of garlic and tomatoes filled the small space between them. She noticed his eyes follow the steam rising from her pasta. "I wasn't very hungry," he lied, and though his voice was steady, his stomach betrayed him with a low growl. Ms. Rivera looked down at her lunch, then back at the thin boy. "You know, my eyes are always bigger than my stomach. I can never finish this whole container. Would you help me out?" He hesitated, pride battling hunger in his expression. "I don't have an extra fork, though," she said, rummaging in her desk. "But I think I have, yes, some crackers we could use to scoop it up, like edible spoons." She pulled out a package of crackers kept for classroom rewards. A tiny smile flickered across his face. "That's kind of weird." "The best ideas usually are." She pushed the container to the middle of the desk between them. "Try it." Cautiously, he took a cracker and scooped up some pasta. After the first bite, his movements became quicker, less hesitant. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. "My mom makes something like this," he said finally. "But not anymore, no? Did she change her recipe?" Alex shook his head, focusing intently on the pasta. "She works 2 jobs now. She doesn't cook much anymore." Ms. Rivera nodded, letting the silence stretch comfortably. Sometimes the spaces between words told more than the words themselves. "My dad lost his job at the factory," Alex continued after a while, his voice matter-of-fact in the way children often are when delivering heartbreaking news. "He looks for work every day, but nothing yet. My little sisters cry sometimes because they're hungry, but I tell them stories to make them forget." Ms. Rivera's throat tightened. She'd taught long enough to recognize the signs of a family in crisis, but it never got easier to hear. "That's a lot for you to handle," she said gently. "How long has this been going on?" 2 months, I think. The landlord says we have to leave if we can't pay next month." He spoke without self-pity, simply stating facts. "I try not to eat much at home so my sisters can have more." The lunch bell rang, signaling the end of their time. Alex stood quickly, embarrassment washing over his face as if suddenly realizing how much he'd shared. "Thank you for helping me with my lunch," Ms. Rivera said warmly, preventing his retreat. "Maybe you could help me again tomorrow?" "I always bring too much." Relief softened his features. He nodded once before joining the stream of students returning to classrooms. That afternoon, Ms. Rivera couldn't focus on her lesson plans. Her mind kept returning to the empty lunchbox, the 2 thin wrists, the shadows under Alex's eyes. She thought about her own refrigerator at home, full of food she took for granted. The contrast felt like a physical weight on her chest. After school, she drove to the grocery store instead of heading home. She filled her cart methodically, Peanut butter, bread, fruit, cereal, milk, canned soups, pasta, granola bars. Foods that were filling and simple to prepare. At the checkout, she added a rotisserie chicken and a container of mac and cheese from the deli section. Tonight, at least, Alex's family would eat well. She had Alex's address from school records. The apartment building stood in a part of town she rarely visited, its paint peeling, concrete steps cracked. She parked and sat for a moment, suddenly uncertain. Would her help be seen as charity, as pity? Would it embarrass Alex and his family? But hunger outweighed pride. She gathered the grocery bags and climbed the stairs to apartment 3B. A young woman answered, dark circles under her eyes matching her son's. A toddler clung to her leg, and another small girl peeked from behind a doorway. Ms. Rivera? Recognition dawned on her tired face. Is everything okay with Alex? Everything's fine, she assured quickly. She hesitated, then decided on honesty. Alex mentioned things have been difficult lately. I thought these groceries might help a little. The woman's face flushed. For a moment, Ms. Rivera feared she'd made a terrible mistake. Then the woman's shoulders sagged, pride giving way to necessity. Come in, she said quietly. Please. The apartment was clean but nearly empty. A mattress lay on the living room floor. No couch, no TV, just a small table with 3 mismatched chairs. Ms. Rivera realized they'd been selling furniture to pay bills. Alex should be back soon. The woman, Maria, explained as they unpacked groceries in the tiny kitchen. He walks his sisters home from the daycare center where my mother works. She watches the little ones when she can. As Maria put away the food, her hands gentle with each item as if it were precious, she shared their story. Her husband had worked at the same factory for 12 years before the layoffs. They'd had savings, but medical bills from the youngest child's asthma had depleted them quickly. Maria had found work cleaning hotels at night and offices early in the morning, but it wasn't enough. Alex tries so hard to be strong, she said, wiping her eyes. He gives his food to the girls. I tell him not to, but he sneaks it onto their plates when he thinks I'm not looking. The door opened then, and Alex entered holding the hand of a small girl. He froze when he saw his teacher at the kitchen table. Ms. Rivera brought us some food, his mother explained. Wasn't that kind? Alex's eyes moved from the groceries to his teacher's face. Something passed between them. Understanding, gratitude, a promise. We're having chicken tonight, his mother continued, new energy in her voice. Would you like to stay for dinner, Ms. Rivera? She should have declined. Should have given them privacy for their first proper meal in weeks, but something in Alex's expression made her nod. I'd like that very much. They ate at the small table, the chicken and sides Ms. Rivera had brought creating a feast by their recent standards. The girls chattered happily, too young to fully understand their circumstances. Alex ate slowly, savoring each bite, his eyes brighter than they had been in class. As Ms. Rivera drove home later that evening, she thought about the systems that had failed this family. A father with no safety net after losing his job, medical bills destroying their savings, social services stretched too thin to notice one more struggling family. One meal wouldn't solve their problems. Neither would groceries or shared lunches, but it was a start. The next morning, she arrived at school early. She rearranged her classroom, adding a small cabinet near her desk. Inside, she placed granola bars, fruit cups, crackers, and juice boxes. A drawer in her desk now held a spare toothbrush, clean socks, and basic school supplies. When Alex arrived, she noticed the change immediately. His shoulders were straighter, his eyes more focused. He'd slept with a full stomach. It was a small victory, but she'd take it. As the students worked, Ms. Rivera opened her planner and began making lists. Food pantries in the area, job placement services, housing assistance programs, medical clinics with sliding scale fees. One teacher couldn't fix a broken system, but for this one family, this one child whose potential was too bright to be dimmed by hunger, she could build a bridge to something better. She glanced up and caught Alex watching her. He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes before returning to his work. In that moment, Ms. Rivera knew this was just the beginning of their story. Fall turned to winter, and the small cabinet in Ms. Rivera's classroom became a lifeline for Alex. The routine they established was simple but effective. Each morning, before other students arrived, Alex would slip into the classroom and pack his backpack with enough food for himself and his sisters. On Fridays, Ms. Rivera would add extra supplies to last through the weekend. No words were exchanged during these moments, just nods and small smiles that carried the weight of their understanding. But Ms. Rivera soon realized that feeding Alex's body wasn't enough. His mind was hungry too. The first sign came during a math lesson on fractions. While other students struggled with the concept, Alex finished the worksheet in minutes. Ms. Rivera checked his work, expecting errors given his speed. Instead, she found every answer correct, with neat calculations in the margins. "These look good," she said, handing back his paper. "Would you like something more challenging?" Alex nodded eagerly, his eyes brightening in a way she rarely saw outside their morning exchanges. Ms. Rivera pulled a sixth-grade textbook from her shelf and opened to a chapter on ratios. "Try these," she suggested. By the end of the hour, he'd completed problems meant for students 2 years ahead. More importantly, he was fully awake, engaged, leaning into the work rather than away from it. That afternoon, Ms. Rivera stayed late, digging through old curriculum materials and printing worksheets from online resources. She created a separate folder of math challenges for Alex, problems that would stretch his abilities without breaking them. The next day, she placed the folder on his desk before class. "For when you finish early," she said simply. His fingers traced the cover, a look of wonder crossing his face as if she'd given him something far more valuable than paper and problems. Winter deepened, bringing snow that piled in dirty heaps along the sidewalks. Ms. Rivera learned from their brief conversations that things were slowly improving for Alex's family. His father had found temporary work clearing snow for the city, and Maria had secured a more stable position as a hotel housekeeper. They'd been able to keep their apartment, though bills remained a constant struggle. One evening in January, Ms. Rivera was working late, preparing for parent-teacher conferences, when a knock sounded at her classroom door. She looked up to find Maria standing there, snow melting from her worn boots. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Maria said. "Alex is at home with his father and sisters. I wanted to speak with you alone." Ms. Rivera welcomed her in, clearing a spot at one of the student desks. "Is everything okay?" Maria nodded, unwinding her scarf. "Better than it has been in months. Ramon, my husband, starts training for a warehouse job next week. The pay isn't what he made before, but it's steady work." "That's wonderful news." "Yes." Maria's hands twisted together on the desktop. "We still have a long way to go, but we can see a path forward now." She looked up, her eyes shining. "I came to thank you. The food, the support, you helped us through our darkest time." Ms. Rivera felt warmth spread through her chest. "I'm just glad I could help." "There's something else," Maria continued. "Alex shows me his math folder every night. The special problems you give him." Pride filled her voice. "He loves them. Stays up too late sometimes trying to solve the hardest ones." Ms. Rivera smiled. "He has a remarkable mind for mathematics. I've taught for 15 years, and I've rarely seen such natural ability." "That's what I wanted to talk about." Maria leaned forward. "Back in Mexico before we came here, Ramon's brother was an engineer. Alex reminds me of him, the way he thinks, how he can see patterns that others miss." Her expression grew serious. "I don't want Alex's talent to be wasted because of our circumstances." Ms. Rivera understood immediately. Poverty had a way of narrowing possibilities, of making survival the only goal worth pursuing. Dreams became luxuries that families like Alex's couldn't afford. "There's a citywide math competition in April," Ms. Rivera said, an idea forming. "Students from all over compete. Winners receive recognition that can lead to opportunities, special programs, scholarships eventually." "Would Alex qualify?" "Without question, but—" Ms. Rivera hesitated. "There's a registration fee. $50. Maria's face fell slightly, but she nodded. "We'll find a way. Maybe by April." "The deadline is next week," Ms. Rivera said gently. "But don't worry about the fee. The school has a fund for these situations." This wasn't entirely true. There was no such fund. But there was Ms. Rivera's next paycheck, which could spare $50. "Are you sure?" Maria asked. "Absolutely. All Alex needs to do is practice. I can work with him after school if that helps." And so began their afternoon sessions. 3 days a week, Alex stayed an hour after dismissal, working through competition preparation materials Ms. Rivera gathered. She discovered that his mathematical intuition went beyond calculations. He could visualize problems, approaching them from unexpected angles that sometimes left even her impressed. "How did you think to try that?" she asked one day after he found an elegant solution to a geometry problem. Alex shrugged, a small smile playing at his lips. It just made sense in my head, like how puzzle pieces fit together. February brought a fierce cold snap. The school heating system struggled, leaving classrooms chilly. Ms. Rivera noticed Alex arriving without a proper winter coat, just layers of thin sweatshirts. That weekend, she visited a second-hand store and found a good-quality boy's coat with the tag still attached. Someone's unwanted gift. Perhaps the parent of a former student dropped this off, she told Alex on Monday morning. Their son outgrew it before wearing it. I thought of you right away. He saw through the white. She could tell by the knowing look in his eyes, but he accepted the coat with a quiet thank you that conveyed much more as the math competition approached. Alex's confidence grew. His posture straightened. His hand raised more often in class, and his friendships with classmates deepened. The hunger that had once dominated his existence receded enough to allow other parts of him to flourish. On the morning of the competition, Ms. Rivera picked Alex up in her car. Maria stood on the apartment steps with his sisters, all of them waving as if sending off a champion. Nervous? Ms. Rivera asked as they drove downtown to the community college hosting the event. Alex nodded, his fingers tapping a rhythm on his knees. What if the problems are too hard? Then you solve as many as you can, she said simply. But Alex, listen to me. She waited until his eyes met hers at a stoplight. No matter what happens today, I'm already proud of you. Not just for your math skills, but for your character, how you care for your sisters, how hard you work, how you never give up. His eyes widened slightly, as if the idea that someone could be proud of him was more surprising than any mathematical concept. The competition was held in a large auditorium, hundreds of students seated at individual desks. Parents and teachers watched from the sidelines as proctors distributed test booklets. Alex looked small among the competitors, many from wealthy schools with well-funded math programs and years of coaching. Remember to read each question twice, Ms. Rivera said, giving his shoulder a gentle squeeze before taking her place in the observation area. For 2 hours, she watched him work, head bent over his paper, pencil moving steadily. Occasionally, he'd stop, close his eyes as if visualizing something, then return to writing with renewed purpose. Not once did he look around at other competitors or show signs of giving up. When time was called, he handed in his booklet with a calm expression that gave away nothing. How do you think you did? She asked as they waited for preliminary results. I answered all the questions, he said. Some were really hard, but I kept thinking about what you said, about approaching problems from different angles. They sat together as names were called, starting from 10th place. Ms. Rivera held her breath as they reached the top 5, hardly daring to hope but unable to stop herself. In 2nd place, from Lincoln Elementary, Alex Rodriguez. The burst of pride that exploded in her chest was unlike anything Ms. Rivera had felt in her teaching career. Alex froze beside her, shock evident on his face. That's you, she whispered, nudging him gently. Go on. He walked to the stage in a daze, accepting his certificate and medal with wide eyes. In that moment, Ms. Rivera saw a glimpse of his future, the possibilities that stretched before him if only he continued to have champions in his corner. Later, as they drove home with his medal catching the afternoon sunlight, Alex spoke quietly. No one in my family has ever won anything before. Ms. Rivera glanced at him, this remarkable boy who had endured so much yet still managed to shine. This is just the beginning, Alex, just the beginning. And she knew, with the bone-deep certainty that sometimes comes to teachers, that she was right. His journey was just beginning, and somehow she would make sure he had what he needed to travel it all the way. 8 years passed in a blur of growth and change. The small boy who once pretended to eat from an empty lunchbox now stood tall at the podium, addressing his graduating class as valedictorian. At 18, Alex had grown into his potential like a tree reaching toward the sun. His shoulders were broader, his voice deeper, but his eyes still held that same quiet determination Ms. Rivera had recognized long ago. She sat in the audience, dabbing at tears as she listened to his speech. After all these years, they had maintained their connection. When Alex entered middle school, Ms. Rivera had made sure he was placed in advanced math classes. During high school, she'd helped him navigate college applications and scholarship essays. Their weekly check-ins had become a constant in both their lives. The future isn't something that just happens to us, Alex was saying, his voice steady and clear over the microphone. It's something we build, choice by choice, day by day, and none of us builds it alone. His eyes found Ms. Rivera in the crowd. The slight nod he gave her carried the weight of their shared history. After the ceremony, families gathered on the school lawn, taking photos and celebrating. Alex introduced Ms. Rivera to distant relatives who had traveled for the occasion. His parents stood nearby, pride evident in their faces. Ramon had secured steady work at a shipping company. Maria had earned her GED and now managed housekeeping at the hotel where she once cleaned rooms. The family had moved to a small house the previous year. Nothing fancy, but their own space with a yard where Alex's sisters could play. Have you decided? Ms. Rivera asked Alex when they had a moment alone. He nodded, excitement lighting his features. State University. The scholarship covers tuition and books. I'll be the first in my family to go to college. Computer science. She confirmed. Yes, and mathematics. I'm doing a double major. Ms. Rivera wasn't surprised. Alex had never been one to take the easy path. I'll need to work, of course, he continued, for housing and food. But I found a job in the university computer lab, 20 hours a week, and I can study when it's quiet. You'll manage, she said, confidence in her voice. You always do. The summer passed quickly. Ms. Rivera helped Alex prepare for university life, taking him shopping for necessities and teaching him basics like laundry and simple cooking. His parents wanted to help but were stretched thin supporting his younger sisters. The oldest, Lucia, was showing academic promise of her own, and they were determined to give her the same chances Alex had fought for. The day before he left for college, Alex stopped by Ms. Rivera's house. She had moved to a small bungalow closer to the school a few years earlier. Her garden was in full bloom, tomatoes heavy on their vines, marigolds bright against the fence. I brought you something, he said, handing her a small, wrapped package. Inside was a framed photo of Alex at the math competition all those years ago, his medal gleaming against his shirt, his smile shy but proud. She recognized the moment. She'd taken the picture herself after the awards ceremony. Turn it over, he urged. On the back, he had written, "For Ms. Rivera, who saw me when I was invisible. This journey began with you." College tested Alex in ways neither of them had anticipated. The academic work challenged him, but he thrived under pressure, his mind expanding to meet each new concept. The social adjustment proved harder. Many of his classmates came from wealthy backgrounds, their parents funding not just their education but their lifestyles. They spent freely on entertainment and conveniences while Alex counted every dollar, aware of the loans accumulating despite his scholarship. His campus job helped, but as costs mounted, he took on a second position waiting tables at a restaurant near campus, then a third delivering food on weekends. He slept little, studied whenever possible, and called home weekly to check on his sisters. Ms. Rivera worried about the toll this schedule was taking. During one of their regular phone calls in his sophomore year, she heard the exhaustion in his voice. "Maybe drop one job," she suggested. "I could help a little." "No," he said firmly. "You've done enough. More than enough. This is my mountain to climb." What he didn't say but she understood was that his struggle had purpose. Every difficult shift, every late night of study was laying groundwork for the future he envisioned. Not just for himself, but for his family. By junior year, Alex's professors had taken notice of his exceptional abilities. One in particular, Dr. Chen, invited him to join a research team developing algorithms for financial data analysis. The position came with a stipend that allowed Alex to drop his restaurant job, giving him precious hours back each week. "It's fascinating work," he told Ms. Rivera during their monthly video call. His face, thinner than she'd like but animated with enthusiasm, filled her laptop screen. "We're teaching computers to find patterns in market data that humans might miss. The applications are huge, everything from fraud detection to investment strategies." She didn't understand all the technical details he shared, but his passion was clear. In those moments, she saw the spark that had been present in the 10-year-old solving advanced math problems at her classroom desk. It had grown into a flame. Senior year brought more recognition. Alex's team won a prestigious innovation competition, their algorithm outperforming those from graduate teams. Job offers followed, established tech firms offering stability and solid starting salaries. But a smaller opportunity caught Alex's attention. "It's a startup," he explained to Ms. Rivera during winter break. They sat at her kitchen table, steam rising from mugs of hot chocolate. 3 graduates from the engineering department. They're building a platform to democratize financial planning and investment, making the tools of wealth management available to regular people, not just the rich. "Sounds risky," she observed. "It is. The salary is lower than the other offers, but they're giving me equity, ownership in the company." His eyes held the same look they had before the math competition. "I believe in what they're doing, and in what I can bring to it." Ms. Rivera recognized the determination in his voice. "Some lessons once learned became part of who you are." Alex had learned early that taking the harder path often led to greater rewards. The first 2 years at the startup were brutally demanding. Alex worked 14-hour days, sometimes sleeping on a cot in the office. The small team burned through their initial funding, scraped together more from reluctant investors, and pushed forward on caffeine and conviction. Alex's algorithms formed the backbone of their platform, analyzing user data to generate personalized financial recommendations. During this time, his calls to Ms. Rivera became less frequent, but more needed. She provided perspective when he was too close to the problems, reminder of his worth when deals fell through, celebration of small victories when no one else understood their significance. In the 3rd year, things began to change. Users flocked to the platform, attracted by its intuitive design and the accuracy of its recommendations. Larger financial institutions took notice. One in particular, a tech giant expanding into financial services, began discussions about partnership opportunities. "They want our technology," Alex told Ms. Rivera during a rare visit home. At 28, he looked both older and younger than his age. Lines of stress around his eyes, but excitement lending energy to his movements. "Specifically my algorithms. The prediction models I've built. What does that mean for you?" she asked, serving him a second helping of the pasta she'd made, still his favorite after all these years. "It means..." He paused, a smile slowly spreading across his face. "It means they're offering to buy the company, all of it, for an amount that's hard to even comprehend." The acquisition moved quickly. By the end of the month, the deal was signed. Alex's equity, which had seemed like such a gamble 4 years earlier, translated into a sum that left him staring at his bank account in disbelief. He was a millionaire at 28. That night, alone in his apartment, Alex opened his laptop and looked at the list he'd been adding to for years. "When I have enough," he had titled it. Items accumulated over time: pay off parents' mortgage, college funds for Lucia and Elena, seed money for mom's catering business idea. He could now check off every item and add dozens more. But one task didn't appear on the digital list. It lived instead in his heart, a promise he'd made to himself years ago in a classroom, where a teacher had shared her lunch with a hungry boy. Alex reached for his phone and pulled up an image he'd saved from social media. Ms. Rivera at her retirement party last year, surrounded by current and former colleagues. The article mentioned health concerns as the reason for her early retirement, though she had never discussed these with him. It was time to find out more. Time to complete the circle that had begun with an empty lunchbox and a teacher who noticed. Finding someone shouldn't be difficult in the age of social media and digital footprints. But Ms. Rivera, Alex discovered, had always been a private person. Her retirement announcement in the local newspaper 2 years ago mentioned only that she was stepping down after 32 years of teaching to focus on personal matters. No forwarding address, no hints about her plans. Alex sat in his downtown apartment, surrounded by the sleek furniture he'd barely had time to enjoy since the company acquisition. The wall of windows offered a stunning city view that still felt surreal to a boy who had once lived in a nearly empty apartment with his family. He scrolled through his phone contacts and found Thomas Wells, the principal at his old elementary school. They'd kept in loose contact over the years, with Thomas occasionally reaching out when the school needed resources for students in situations similar to Alex's childhood. "Alex, good to hear from you," Thomas answered on the second ring. "I saw the news about your company." "Congratulations, thanks. It's been a wild ride." Alex moved to the window, watching the city lights blink on as evening approached. "I'm actually calling about Ms. Rivera. I've been trying to get in touch, but her old contact information isn't working." There was a slight pause on the line. "You haven't heard, then?" Alex's stomach tightened. "Heard what?" "She's been ill." "Kidney failure. She's on dialysis now, waiting for a transplant." The floor seemed to shift beneath Alex's feet. "How long?" "The problem started about 3 years ago. She tried to keep teaching, but the fatigue became too much. That's when she retired." Thomas sighed. "Healthcare costs have been difficult. Teacher's insurance only covers so much." Alex closed his eyes, thinking of all the times Ms. Rivera had checked in during his college years and early career struggles, how she'd never mentioned her own challenges, always focusing instead on his journey. "Do you have her current address?" he asked. "I do, but—" Thomas hesitated. "She's very private about her situation. Alex doesn't want people's pity." "It's not pity," Alex said firmly. "It's family." After getting the address, a small apartment in a senior living community on the outskirts of town, Alex thanked Thomas and ended the call. He stood motionless by the window, memories washing over him. Ms. Rivera slipping granola bars into his backpack, staying late to help him prepare for the math competition, attending his high school graduation when his extended family couldn't afford to travel. He'd become so focused on his own climb that he'd missed the signs of her struggle. When had their check-in calls become less frequent? When had she started deflecting questions about her own life? Pulling out his laptop, Alex began researching kidney disease and transplant costs. The numbers were staggering, even with insurance. Dialysis alone could cost thousands monthly. Add medications, specialist visits, and the reduced income from early retirement. A plan began forming in his mind. Not charity. Ms. Rivera would never accept that, but something that honored both her dignity and her legacy. The next morning, Alex called the superintendent of his old school district. "I'd like to discuss establishing a foundation," he began, "for educators and students." Over the next few weeks, Alex worked with lawyers and financial advisors to create the framework for the Rivera Education Foundation. He allocated $5 million from his new fortune, an amount that seemed impossible just months ago, but now represented purpose rather than simply wealth. The foundation would have two main functions: providing meal security and educational support for students in need, and offering healthcare supplements for teachers facing major medical expenses. Both programs would be structured as professional development and student achievement initiatives to preserve recipients' dignity. While the legal framework was being established, Alex focused on his more personal mission. He needed to reconnect with Ms. Rivera, but knew she would reject outright charity. She needed to see him not as a benefactor, but as the person she had always believed he could become. He contacted the school district's event coordinator and proposed a special recognition ceremony for retired teachers who had made exceptional differences in students' lives. The district, eager for positive publicity, readily agreed. The event would take place in the gymnasium of his old elementary school. Behind the scenes, Alex made sure Ms. Rivera topped the invitation list. Her former colleagues, aware of the special bond between teacher and former student, helped ensure she would attend despite her health challenges. "She'll be there," Thomas confirmed 2 weeks before the event. "We told her it's about the district's new mentorship program. Several honorees will be recognized, but she doesn't know you're behind it." On the evening before the ceremony, Alex visited his parents' home. They had moved to a modest but comfortable house in a pleasant neighborhood, purchased with Alex's help after the company acquisition. His sisters were thriving. Lucia in her second year of college studying environmental science, Elena preparing for high school graduation. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" his mother asked as they sat in the kitchen after dinner. Alex nodded, turning his coffee mug between his palms. "What if she doesn't want my help?" "You know how proud she is," Maria smiled gently. "Pride is complicated. When we were at our lowest, accepting your teacher's help was one of the hardest things I ever did." She reached across the table to squeeze her son's hand. "But sometimes allowing someone to help you is a gift you give them. It completes a circle." His father, always more quiet, nodded in agreement. "Your Ms. Rivera taught you more than math. She taught you to give without making others feel small. Now you can do the same for her." The morning of the ceremony dawned bright and clear. Alex arrived early, wanting to see the old school empty before the crowds arrived. He walked the hallways, memories flooding back with each step. The classroom where he'd first accepted Ms. Rivera's shared lunch. The office where she'd registered him for the math competition. The playground where, over time, he'd transformed from the hungry, tired boy to a student with a future. By 11, the gymnasium had been transformed with chairs, a small stage, and modest decorations. Alex checked every detail from the comfort of the seating to the accessibility of the bathrooms. Ms. Rivera would be on dialysis, Thomas had warned. She tired easily and sometimes needed a wheelchair for longer events. The ceremony was scheduled for 1 o'clock. At 12:30, Alex retreated to an empty classroom to collect his thoughts. He reviewed his speech. Though the words that mattered most weren't on the page, guests began arriving. Current teachers, administrators, community members. Alex remained out of sight, watching through a classroom window as cars pulled into the parking lot. At 12:50, he spotted Thomas helping an older woman from a car. Even from a distance, Alex recognized Ms. Rivera immediately. She moved more slowly now, leaning on a cane, but her straight posture and careful movements were instantly familiar. His throat tightened. 8 months had passed since they'd last spoken on the phone. A call where she'd asked about his work and he'd been too busy, too focused on closing the acquisition deal, to ask the right questions about her life. At 1 o'clock precisely, the district superintendent welcomed everyone and explained the purpose of the gathering, to honor teachers who had gone above and beyond for their students. 3 retired teachers were recognized for various achievements. Ms. Rivera sat in the front row, applauding each one genuinely despite the visible tiredness in her face. Our final speaker today, the superintendent announced, is here to honor a teacher who changed the course of his life. He's traveled a remarkable journey from our classrooms to becoming one of the tech industry's rising stars. Please welcome back Alex Rodriguez. A murmur went through the crowd as Alex walked onto the small stage. He scanned the audience, finding Ms. Rivera immediately. The shock on her face transformed slowly into recognition, then into a smile that erased years of illness from her features. "Good afternoon," Alex began, his voice steady despite the emotion building in his chest. 15 years ago, I sat in classroom 112 in this very building, pretending to eat from an empty lunchbox because I was too ashamed to admit my family couldn't afford food. A hush fell over the gymnasium. But there was someone who saw beyond that empty lunchbox, someone who didn't just feed my body, but who recognized hunger of a different kind, a hunger to learn, to grow, to become something more than my circumstances suggested was possible. As he spoke, Alex never broke eye contact with Ms. Rivera. Tears streamed silently down her face, but her smile remained, proud and unwavering. That teacher didn't just share her lunch with me. She shared her belief that I mattered, that my mind was worth challenging, that my future was worth investing in. Alex paused, his own eyes filling. When you're a child in poverty, the hardest thing isn't always the physical hunger. It's the invisibility. Ms. Rivera made me visible again. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Today, I want to announce the creation of the Rivera Education Foundation, established with an initial endowment of $5 million. A collective gasp filled the room. Ms. Rivera's hand flew to her mouth. This foundation will ensure that no child in our district attends school hungry. It will provide educational enrichment for students showing promise in mathematics and science, and it will offer support for educators facing extraordinary healthcare challenges. Alex set aside his prepared remarks and spoke directly to his former teacher. "Ms. Rivera, you once told me that the future isn't something that just happens to us. It's something we build choice by choice, day by day, and none of us builds it alone." He extended his hand toward her. "Will you help me build this?" The room erupted in applause as Ms. Rivera nodded, tears flowing freely now. The circle was beginning to close, but their story wasn't over yet. It was, in many ways, just beginning again. After the ceremony, people crowded around Alex, offering congratulations and sharing their own stories of Ms. Rivera's impact. He acknowledged them politely but kept his eyes on his former teacher, who remained seated, visibly overwhelmed by the day's events. When the crowd finally thinned, Alex made his way to her. Up close, he could see the toll illness had taken. Her once dark hair now completely gray, her face thinner, the dialysis port partially visible beneath her sleeve. But her eyes were unchanged, still sharp and perceptive as they studied his face. "You went through all this trouble," she said quietly as he sat beside her, "when you could have just called." Alex smiled. Would you have told me about your health if I had? She looked down at her hands. Probably not. That's what I thought. He reached over and gently took her hand. You've always been better at giving help than receiving it. A trait someone else I know seems to have picked up, she replied with a knowing look. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the empty gymnasium echoing with the conversations of the few remaining guests. I don't need charity, Alex, she finally said, her voice firm despite its new frailty. Good, because I'm not offering any. He turned to face her fully. I'm offering a partnership. The foundation needs a director, someone who understands both education and the real challenges students face. Who better than you? She raised an eyebrow. I'm on dialysis 3 times a week, so we'll schedule around it. The foundation can provide health benefits that supplement your retirement plan, better coverage, access to specialists. He kept his tone matter-of-fact, presenting it as a business arrangement rather than a rescue. This isn't about saving you, Ms. Rivera. It's about continuing what you started when you shared your lunch with me, just on a bigger scale. The corner of her mouth twitched upward. You've gotten good at negotiating. I learned from the best. Remember how you convinced me that helping you eat your extra lunch was actually doing you a favor? She laughed then, the sound carrying across the empty gym like music. You never really believed that, did you? Not for a minute. But I appreciated the chance to keep my dignity. He squeezed her hand. That's all I'm offering you now. 2 weeks later, they sat together in the small office space Alex had rented for the foundation. Papers covered the desk between them, organizational charts, program outlines, budget projections. Ms. Rivera's medical appointments filled the mornings, but her afternoons were dedicated to building their shared vision. We need to be careful about how we identify students for the food program, she said, reviewing his draft proposal. Children can be cruel to each other. The stigma of receiving help can sometimes be as painful as the hunger itself. Alex nodded, thinking back to his own experience. What if we make it universal? Healthy snacks available in every classroom. Breakfast available to anyone who arrives early. Better. And we could add a backpack program for weekends, food sent home in ordinary backpacks. No special packaging to single children out. Their conversations flowed like this for hours. Practical plans built on shared experience. Alex brought his business acumen and resources. Ms. Rivera contributed her decades of insight into children's needs in school systems. During one afternoon session, she suddenly placed her hand over a budget proposal, stopping their work. Why didn't you tell me how successful you'd become? All those phone calls over the years, and you never mentioned you were building something extraordinary. Alex considered the question. At first, I wasn't sure it would work out. The startup world is full of failures. Then once things started taking off, he shrugged. It felt strange to talk about money when I remembered where I started. Like I might sound like I was bragging. I would have been proud, not judgmental, she said softly. I know that now. He met her eyes. Why didn't you tell me you were sick? She smiled sadly. For similar reasons, I suppose. I didn't want our conversations to become about my health. You were building your future. My problems seemed irrelevant to that journey. You've never been irrelevant to my journey, Alex said firmly. Their work on the foundation progressed rapidly. By the 3-month mark, they had established the weekend backpack program in 5 schools. Alex hired a small staff, but Ms. Rivera remained the heart of the operation, even on days when dialysis left her exhausted. During this time, Alex learned more about her kidney disease. Her doctors were candid. The waiting list for a transplant was long, and her age didn't work in her favor for priority listing. Without a living donor, she might wait years for a match, years that dialysis would increasingly drain her strength. Alex had himself tested immediately, but their blood types were incompatible. He researched paired donation programs, where incompatible donor-recipient pairs were matched with others in similar situations. But the process was complex and outcomes uncertain. Instead, he focused on what he could control, ensuring she had the best medical care available, creating a work environment that accommodated her health needs, and expanding the foundation's impact. 6 months after the launch, they celebrated their first educational initiative, a weekend math enrichment program for promising students from low-income backgrounds. Watching the children gather in the classroom, their faces eager and uncertain just as his had once been, Alex felt a strange doubling of time. He was both the nervous child and the adult creating opportunity. Ms. Rivera stood beside him, leaning slightly on her cane. "Full circle," she murmured, seeming to read his thoughts. That evening, they shared dinner at a quiet restaurant. Ms. Rivera picked at her carefully portioned meal, her diet restricted by her kidney function. "I have something to tell you," she said, setting down her fork. "I got a call yesterday. They've found a donor match." Alex nearly dropped his glass. That's incredible." "How, when?" "Through the paired donation program you researched." Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Apparently, someone at the hospital saw the foundation announcement in the paper. They reached out to the transplant center and asked if they could help expedite the matching process." "Who was it?" "I want to thank them," she shook her head. "Anonymous. The coordinator said they specifically didn't want recognition." She reached across the table to take his hand. "But I think they wanted to support what we're building. One act of kindness inspiring another." The transplant surgery was scheduled for the following month. Alex arranged for the best nephrologist in the country to consult on her case and rented an apartment near the hospital for her recovery period. Throughout her preparation, Ms. Rivera remained focused on their work, finalizing plans for a scholarship program bearing her name.